I'm photographer David duChemin, and this is Vision is Better, a sometimes weekly podcast about the craft and art of photography. Welcome here. Hey, welcome to another episode of Vision is Better. I'm your host, David duChemin, and today we're celebrating the fourth day in the big 5-day Ultimate Photography Bundle sale between September 10th and September 15th, 2015. If you're watching this in the future, you can't take advantage of the sale, but the stuff we're going to talk about is still relevant, so stay tuned. And for those of you that are watching it currently, between September 10th and 2015, take a look at the show notes. There's some stuff in there for you as well. Today I want to talk about 4 things that you can immediately do to strengthen your landscape photography. So I thought instead of just kind of being a talking head, as I often am, I thought we'd turn our attention to the monitor and I kind of walk you through some photographs while I talk to you about these 4 things that you can immediately do to change, to improve, to strengthen your landscape photography. All right, we'll see you in a second. Okay, so here's, I'm going to walk you through several photographs. Not all of them were chosen because of their artistic merit. The first 3 that I want to show you, definitely not chosen for their artistic merit. In fact, neither of these 3 made it into what would remotely be called a final collection, but I made them in part because this is my own process. These are the sketch images. This is sort of, you're looking at the cutting room floor, but I did think they made a good example of what I wanted to talk about. So I guess the first thing that you can do to strengthen your landscape photography, and really this applies to all kinds of photography, but specifically I find to landscape photography. One of the first things that you can do is pay more attention, be more mindful of, and intentional about your foreground to background relationships. So I'm going to walk very quickly through these four images and just kind of talk about them. Now these were shot at a slightly low shutter speed. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more blur in these elements as the wind took them. They were made in, the photographs were made in Hokkaido last year, and I really like the sparseness of this place. And I got to this scene and everything was knee deep in snow, and I thought I'd sort of play around. But you have these 3 stalks in the snow, and I wanted to play with different kinds of composition. This is the way that I photograph. I get on my knees and I just move around and I play and I see what my movements forward and back, left and right, what they do to change the relationship of elements in the frame. And so in terms of understanding your foreground elements and the way that you place them, sort of front to back and left to right in your frame, just be aware that as you experiment, you move around, it has a profound effect on where those elements are in relationship to each other. So this is the first frame. This is the second frame. These are the same 3 stalks. I've just moved considerably over to the left. The tree is still relatively in the same position in the background, but notice how my foreground has considerably changed. And then this is a third frame. The difference between this one and the previous one, the stalks in this image break the horizon of that snowbank, whereas here they're below. So this was a move a little higher. Here I'm a little lower, and here I'm a little more over to the right. And all 3 of these considerably change the composition. Now, as I said, these are images that I made, actually in anticipation of finding a better composition. I never really did, although to be honest, the closest I kind of got was something a little bit more like this. And I ended up taking out that one stalk entirely and giving myself more of a static composition using the square frame. I want to show you a couple other examples. And this was photographed on Fogo Island in Newfoundland. And I'll just show you really quickly the other frame. The difference between the 2, obviously this one I was a little higher and this one I was a little lower. And so in terms of the foreground and background relationships, you'll notice that in this frame there is much more of a left to right flow. It's uninterrupted by this large rock in the foreground. When I shift my position and go down, what I gain is prominence in these foreground bushes or ground shrubs, and I like that. This becomes much more looming, and I like that too. But for everything that we gain, we also lose something in photography. When you're composing, it's always about sort of the give and take and the compromise. And I found in the end that I actually much preferred the flow left to right of the ocean in the background than I did the interrupted way that this kind of, the rock juts in, prevents me from sort of resolving this, and there's this little orphaned bit over here. So just understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish and understanding that your foreground to background relationships can be intentionally chosen purely based on the way that you move within the frame. Now I'm going to show you 3 other ones. This is in relation to the next thing I want to talk about. So the first thing is just being intentional about your foreground to background relationships. The second thing I want to mention is establishing mood. It's very easy to, in some ways, to go out when the mood is already there and just assume that that mood will translate into the camera. And the fact is, it won't. And also, there's probably not much chance that you can create mood if it's not already there. So it's this dance between what exists already out there in the scene and the decisions that you make to complement or exaggerate that existing mood. So these 3 were photographed on the same morning in Hokkaido. They're roughly the same scene, although they're different pieces of the same scene. And as you can see, there was already some mood, but to build on that mood, I needed to use the tools that were available to me. So in all 3 of these, I used a graduated neutral density filter to retain the detail in the sky and still keep the foreground nice and bright. I used a full ND, probably a 3-stop or even a 10-stop. I can't recall now. It doesn't show in the EXIF data. But using these full ND filters allows me to slow things even down. Slow things down even more to the point where the crashing waves on the shore, which on a very short exposure would have appeared very sort of particular and granular, and I would have been focusing on the waves. Here, over the span of time, they become a little bit more ethereal, and the clouds kind of blend. The longer exposure gives me a little bit more emphasis on those what they call crepuscular rays or God rays coming out of the clouds in 2 of the images. And now, of course, it's easy to overuse this kind of effect, and most of us are guilty of overusing an effect once in a while. But the point isn't, how to make really long exposures in the water. The point is, if you want to create mood in your landscape, and mood is what is going to largely connect to us on an emotional level. It's what we see visually that we can feel emotionally. And so mood is a great way to connect with your audience in your photography. The question is, how do you do it? And there's lots of ways to do it. Paying attention to color balance after the fact in post-production would, of course, be one of those ways. So it's not always in camera, though I prefer to accomplish it that way. In the case of these 3 images, the mood is much more significant with the introduction of the filters and the long exposures than it would have been otherwise. Of course, composition still matters. All your other decisions are also still important. And so while we're talking about composition, the third thing that I think is important for our landscapes, and again, this is back to Fogo Island, is to think in terms of shapes and lines and tones and colors, and not just in terms of trees and rocks or the elements that are there. Because when you make a photograph, you can, of course, there's trees and rocks, and well, in this case, there's a dock, or they call it a stage in Newfoundland, where they prepare their nets and they dry their fish, and there's a sun and a sun flare and a boat, and there's water, and so you have all these elements. But when you make a photograph, this is not a boat, it's a visual representation of a boat. So the question is, how can I represent that boat in the best possible way? How can I represent this stage and these lobster traps in the best possible way compositionally? And so I have to start thinking more in terms of light and lines and colors. And in this case, I could have photographed it. In fact, I started photographing it from up on top of the stage, but the composition wasn't as powerful. The lines didn't lead me as dynamically as they do from this composition, where this line of the boat heads into the center of the image, and this line heads to the center, and all of these lines head to the center. The traps and the repeating element here heads to the center. So it gives me this great lead in and creates depth in the photograph. You only get that, at least intentionally. You might get it accidentally once in a while, but you only get it intentionally if you're actively thinking about lines and shapes, repeated elements. Composition is important in landscape photography. You cannot just look at a subject and say, oh my God, that's a beautiful subject. Pick up your camera and create out of that beautiful subject a beautiful photograph. You could actually create a very mundane, very boring, tragically boring. I have hard drives full of some of these photographs. Tragically boring photograph of something really extraordinarily beautiful. Don't get seduced by your subject. Think in terms of lines and tones and pay attention to your composition. That's the third thing that you can do. And the fourth thing that you can do is use more frames instead of less. It's very tempting for us to look at a scene and go, oh my gosh, that scene is absolutely fantastic, and try to get it all in. Put on your 16 millimeter and try to cram it all in, where it could be that the best thing that you can do is to break your scene down into pieces and present it more as a series of tableaux, giving each element the strongest possible impact, rather than taking a really wide shot where everything becomes really small and every element has much less impact. So in terms of the four things that you can immediately do for your landscape photography, this would be the fourth one that I would recommend you at least consider using more frames rather than less. Instead of using one frame or two, try 3 or 4. See if you can switch up the compositions. See if you can create something that's more of a series that complements each other. It may not be the solution for the kind of work that you're doing. It could be that the big epic landscape, the master shot is what you need. But in terms of sort of an ongoing effort to create bodies of work, I would suggest that you look at or consider using more frames rather than less. So there you go, 4 things that you can do to immediately improve your landscape photography. Of course, remember, none of these are a magic wand. This is not a secret formula or a template. Even though I've given you this stuff, the hard work is still yours. The hard work is still figuring out how to incorporate that in a way that's unique to you, in a way that's unique to the scene that's in front of you. Not every photograph benefits, even though there's water in it, not every photograph benefits from a neutral density filter and a long exposure. Not every photograph benefits from a Polaroid. Excuse me, not Polaroid, a polarizer. Sometimes you want the glare on the water to create tonal differences in a photograph, especially black and white. So there are no secrets. There are no formulas or templates. But these 4 things, I think, just as sort of a guideline for improving your photography, can really help. Thanks so much for sticking with me for the last 4 days. We got one more day to go on this 5-day deal. I hope that the stuff that I'm sharing is helpful to you. I hope that the resource that's available in this 5-day deal, which again, the notes will give you more details. There's, as I've said already, and I don't want to go over it too much again, but there's incredible value. For $127, you get 3,000, gosh, what is it? Sorry, it's over $3,000 worth of value. It's over 70 hours worth of video tutorials, over 700 pages worth of ebook content, and there's textures and overlays, and there's just, it's a huge package, and the deal is incredible. And people I've talked to that purchased last year have been working all year through this educational material and learning a lot and found incredible value in it. On top of that, a lot of money is going to some incredible causes, and some of the affiliate money that I'm earning is going to some of these projects as well. So you're helping me, and I'm grateful. Thanks very much. We'll see you next time. Remember, gear's good, but vision's better.